Welcome, everyone. My name is Jen McHugh. I'm the Manager of Adult Learning at the Michener Art Museum. Welcome to our virtual program, Sites of Creativity and Community, Art Colonies at Cornish, Stockbridge, and New Hope. So this program is going to focus on the historical artistic communities of Cornish, New Hampshire, Stockbridge, Massachusetts, as well as New Hope, Pennsylvania. This was put together by Dana Pilson. She was kind enough to offer to do this, and I hope she had a lot of fun putting it together. Let me tell you a little bit about Dana. She is a curatorial researcher and collections coordinator at Chesterwood, the historic home, studio, and garden of American sculptor Daniel Chester French. It's located in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. She's a member of the curatorial team for the exhibition and accompanying catalog, Monuments and Myths, the America of Sculptors, Augustus Saint-Gaudens, and Daniel Chester French. She and Chesterwood director emerita Donna Hassler contributed an essay to the exhibition catalog, focusing on the studio practices and domestic lives of Saint-Gaudens and French. Among her current projects is researching the art colony that blossomed during the years Daniel Chester French helped coordinate the annual Stockbridge Art Association exhibitions of painting and sculpture. So thank you, Dana, and I will hand it over to you.
Great. Now I just have to do the sharing. Welcome, everyone. There we go. Jen, are we sharing? Can you thumbs up? Okay. First of all, I just want to apologize that I wasn't able to give this talk a few weeks ago and that we had to delay it by some time. I had a family issue that needed to be resolved. So thank you all for your patience and thanks for coming back. Well, great. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for attending this talk, Sites of Creativity, Art Colonies at Cornish, Stockbridge, and New Hope. I want to give a big thank you to Jen McHugh of the Michener, who I guess invited me. I offered, it was sort of a little back and forth to give this presentation. And a big thank you to the curatorial, design, and installations staff at the Michener, who worked so hard to create such a beautiful presentation of Monuments and Myths, the America of Sculptors Augustus Saint-Gaudens and Daniel Chester French. I had the opportunity to visit the Michener a few months ago, and the layout, the use of historical photographs, the interesting juxtaposition of works, and really just the overall feel of the exhibition was exactly what we were envisioning during the planning phases of this project. I think these are a couple of my photos of the exhibition. From the beginning, it was very much a team effort. Donna Hassler, Director Emerita of Chesterwood, and I worked closely with curators from the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park and the American Federation of Arts to come up with object lists and overriding themes. We wrote labels and identified historical photographs to complement the works. And you see one of those in that picture on the right. But the presentations at the individual venues have been almost entirely independent of our input. The Michener staff have all done a marvelous job in truly making this exhibition their own, and we couldn't be happier with how it turned out. As the first exhibition to place the two standouts of late 19th, early 20th century American sculpture side by side, Monuments and Myths highlights some important themes pertinent to Augustus Saint-Gaudens and Daniel Chester French and their art. Themes relating to studio practice, civic sculpture, portraiture, the Civil War, and modern mourning are all examined in the exhibition. The essays in the accompanying catalog go into further detail about many of these themes, and with my co-author, Donna Hassler, we explored Saint-Gaudens's and French's domestic and professional lives at their rural retreats. My talk tonight draws a bit upon our research for this essay and also connects three historic art colonies: the art colony at Cornish, New Hampshire, the current site of the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park, the art colony in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, where French built Chesterwood, his summer home and studio, and New Hope, Pennsylvania, site of an important art colony associated with Pennsylvania Impressionism. Works from New Hope form a cornerstone of the Michener collection. In fact, visitors to the museum walk through the Pennsylvania Impressionism Gallery in order to enter the Monuments and Myths exhibition, providing a visual segue from colony to colony. So the topic of art colonies, as I found when I was researching for this talk, is very broad, and I will only be able to touch upon a few highlights tonight. But if your interest in art colonies is piqued, I encourage you to take a look at some of the many, many books published on the subject, including two that I accessed and found very interesting. The Good and Simple Life, Art Colonies in Europe and America by Michael Jacobs, and Steve Shipp's Historical Guide to America's Original Art Colonies and Their Artists. So tonight I'll give just a very abbreviated gloss on the history, a rich topic that we could spend many hours exploring. The history of art colonies can be traced back to the 19th century, when artists began to move to the countryside to escape the urbanization and industrialization of cities. Urban centers such as Rome and later Paris boasted art schools that focused on academic training, teaching students to draw from a live model in order to compose historical and mythological paintings in their studios. Artists seeking to paint naturalistic subjects in the open air set off to villages outside the city center. This movement took off, and between 1830 and 1914, some 3,000 professional artists traveled away from urban centers into the countryside, residing for varying lengths of time in over 80 communities. The first art colonies were established in France, Germany, and the Netherlands, and the practice soon expanded across Europe and the United States. One of the earliest rural colonies was at Barbizon, a town in the forest of Fontainebleau, south of Paris, once the unmapped preserve of kings and the royal hunting parties. The dense woods, meadows, marshes, and gorges, along with local residents involved in typical rural activities such as planting and reaping, provided artists with plenty of subject matter. Beginning in the 1820s, artists journeyed to Barbizon and stayed at the newly established inn, the Auberge Gone, which I show you at the lower right. It was here where, after spending the day in nature, they convened in the dining room, which you can see at the top right, to share ideas, discuss technical practices, and really just enjoy each other's company. Having a place to gather, eat, drink, socialize, discuss art, and offer criticism is critical for the development of an art colony. And actually, an interesting detail I want to point out is in that photograph of the dining room on the top, those panels in the cabinet on the right were painted by colonists who were living and working at Barbizon. By the middle of the 19th century, a formidable group of French artists, mostly open-air painters, lived and worked here at Barbizon. They painted landscape scenes and peasant agriculture, giving special attention to naturalistic outdoor light. These Barbizon painters actually helped create a transition between classical landscape painting and what would come later, French Impressionism. And at the left is an example of a typical Barbizon school painting by Theodore Rousseau. The landscape showcases the unique terrain of the Fontainebleau forest. There are interesting rock formations and plateaus and really, really old growth trees, some of them hundreds of years old. The painting represents a triumph for Rousseau and the Barbizon School, as the work received great acclaim at the Paris Universal Exposition of 1855. And I think this painting at the lower left is in the Metropolitan Museum's collection. So you can look for it the next time you go there. One of my favorite art colonies to discover during this research is the one established at Skane. You may recognize the name of this town if you're a fan, like I am, of the Danish television show Seaside Hotel. Skane is the northernmost town in Denmark, and artists gathered there to paint the local fishermen, as well as seascapes and the picturesque dunes. Here, as at other colonies, artists experimented with new forms of communal living as they focused on their creative practice. They socialized outdoors and in the dining room in Brundam's Hotel. Today, the dining room, which was decorated with paintings by the artists of the colony, can be seen in the Skane Museum. So already we're seeing a few trends of these hotels with dining rooms, and the artists who would gather there were often involved in decorating the very rooms in which they gathered. I particularly like scenes that show the festive and communal aspects of living in an art colony. And this painting on the left, for example, shows that not only did the artists sit down at the table together, but children and partners were all part of the jovial atmosphere as well. Michael Ancher, a Danish realist artist, first visited Skane in 1874. And I guess if you do watch Seaside Hotel, the sort of look of the sand and the sea and the particular light that Ancher captures in this painting might look familiar to you. I recommend the show. So Michael Ancher, a Danish realist artist, as I said, first visited Skane in 1874. He wound up settling there and joined the colony. And this beautiful painting of women strolling on the beach may remind us of his academic training, but it is remarkable for his delicate handling of northern light and the diaphanous costumes and individualized faces of the women on the beach. It also seems to me to be a bit of a psychological study. The viewer might wonder why the single woman in the front is cut off from the conversations and physical closeness behind her. Many of Ancher's paintings of Skane feature women on the beach, but he also painted the local fishermen and farm workers. Sorry about that. This painting by German artist Heinrich Vogler shows the integration of music and entertainment in the life of a German artist colony. And I especially love the large dog and the tall woman at the center of this composition, as if the artist is reinforcing the importance of family and the domestic sphere to the creative process of making art. Vogler was an early member of the Worpswede artist colony in Germany. He lived there from 1895 until about the 1920s. And he invited, strongly urged his artist friends to join him, insisting that the area was the antidote to urban industrialization. Oh my goodness, this is so typical. Okay, sorry. No. One of the best known European art colonies was at Giverny outside of Paris, which was not only Claude Monet's country home, but also the birthplace of American Impressionism. Monet had settled in Giverny in 1883, and soon after, a small band of American artists found the village. In the 1880s and 90s, thousands of American students were flooding Paris and its art schools. They were attracted there by a more liberal curriculum than what was available in the United States. During the summer, many of these same artists migrated to rural villages such as Giverny, where they could paint out of doors during the day and socialize in the evenings. They played sports such as tennis and held garden parties lit by picturesque Japanese lanterns. Monet never took on a teaching role, but it was his presence there that ensured the steady growth of the colony. Unfortunately, the outbreak of World War I in 1914 marked the end of an era for the Giverny art colony. Robert Vanno, an American impressionist who visited Giverny, would later visit the colonies at Cornish and Stockbridge. And I show you a little comparison between Claude Monet's poppies in Giverny and Vanno's poppies. So the Americans went home, where they adapted the models of Barbizon and Giverny and established colonies with similar goals. Most important was the desire to create art together and to live with like-minded artists. There was often a founder or a de facto leader and a central meeting place, as well as an exhibition space. Naturally, the cross-pollination of arts would occur as writers, composers, dancers, and architects flocked to these locations as well. Parties and special events were important to bring the members of the colony together outside of art creating, and artist spouses took on important roles as hosts, assistants, models, and caregivers. Most of the colonies were in the suburbs or the countryside and were accessible by train and later by automobile. Rural communities promised a simpler life, peace and quiet, and new inspiration found in the beauty of the natural surroundings. Artists would frequently flock together in certain areas, following each other and spending periods working in close proximity to one another. And others, some would bounce around from colony to colony. Others permanently settled in one place. Some important art colonies that developed in the US include Birdcliff in Woodstock, New York, which was founded in 1902 on utopian ideals and based upon the arts and crafts movement, a reaction against the mass production of goods such as furniture and household objects. Birdcliff was a response to the negative effects of modernization and industrialization on true artisanship. And the colony still exists today and continues to host artist residency programs. Over the years, it has attracted many notable artists, including Ashcan school artist Robert Henry, poet Wallace Stevens, and somewhat more recently, Bob Dylan and Chevy Chase, which I would like to learn more about what they did there. Around the turn of the century, the Old Lyme Art Colony in southern Connecticut was the most famous art colony in the US and the first to adopt Impressionism. Artist Henry Ward Ranger arrived at Old Lyme in 1899 and commented, "It looks like Barbizon, the land of Millet. It is only waiting to be painted." Other artists such as Childe Hassam and Frank Vincent Dumond gravitated to Old Lyme, attracted to the pre-industrial atmosphere, colonial architecture, and cultivated landscape. The artists all knew each other either from New York, or other art colonies, and they gathered at the home of Florence Griswold, where suppers were served outdoors on the veranda, and the colony members nicknamed themselves the Hot Art Club, a nod to the venting of opinions about each other's works and art world trends. The Griswold House at Old Lyme offered features found in the influential art colonies of Europe: a stimulating environment, artistic camaraderie, inexpensive lodging, and picturesque scenery. Conveniently located between the cultural hubs of Boston and New York in the lush countryside of Connecticut, Lyme attracted a flourishing colony of artists. Today, you can visit the Florence Griswold Museum, where the house of Florence Griswold has been restored to its 1910 heyday as the boarding house for the colony. Another area that attracted New York artists was the Hamptons on Long Island. William Merritt Chase taught summer school at Shinnecock, and artist Thomas Moran built a studio residence in East Hampton in 1884. Along with his wife, artist Mary Nimmo Moran, they opened the studio as a gathering place for artists, which turned into an art colony almost instantly. East Hampton was an important epicenter for writers and artists, including Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner. And they were there until the 1960s, when land prices began to increase dramatically, driving the artists out. And then finally, the lower right, Taos, New Mexico. In 1915, artist Joseph Henry Sharp, enchanted by the semi-desert landscape and incredible light of Taos, New Mexico, joined the Taos Society of Painters and established an art colony there. New York socialite Mabel Dodge and her husband, the artist Maurice Stern, moved to Taos a year later. And Dodge started the first literary colony in Taos and recruited many artists to relocate there, including Georgia O'Keeffe, who first visited Taos in 1929 and fell completely in love with the area. She visited every summer until 1946, and then she moved permanently to the New Mexico town of Abiquiu. Other famous artists who visited Taos are Ansel Adams and D.H. Lawrence. The histories of these colonies is kept alive today. The Woodstock Birdcliff Guild continues to function as a center for the arts. The Florence Griswold Museum and the Coos, Sharp, Moran, and Pollock Krasner Homes and Studios are all part of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios Network, a program of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Chesterwood and the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park are also members of the Historic Artist Homes and Studios Network. Finally, the Artist Colony at New Hope became an important center for the Pennsylvania Impressionist movement, also known as the New Hope School or the Pennsylvania School of Landscape Painting. The area, not far from Philadelphia, was a pre-industrial landscape of small towns, rivers and canals, rolling hills and scenic views, as well as farmhouses and mills faced with this very unique and interesting stonework. William Langson Lathrop moved to New Hope in 1898, and along with the painter Edward Redfield, he formed an art colony there. And others followed, attracted to the rural landscape as a respite from the urbanization of the city. Pennsylvania Impressionism was born, a style distinctive for its reliance on pastoral imagery and a realism rooted in their common training at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, where they studied with Thomas Eakins and Thomas Anschutz. Eakins is known for his penetrating portraits and shimmering images of rowers on the Schuylkill River of Pennsylvania, and Anschutz was one of Eakins's most prominent students and a practitioner of the realist style in portraiture and scenes of everyday life. So at New Hope, the artists combined this focus on realism with the pre-industrial landscape to create what was deemed as the country's first national style. And so here are some images of some typical New Hope paintings. At New Hope, Edward Redfield, Walter Elmer Schofield, Daniel Garber, and Ray Sloan Braden, I'm not entirely sure I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but I will say Braden and someone can correct me later, produced some of the first truly American paintings. They sent their works to exhibitions in urban centers, such as the National Academy of Design in New York and the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts in Philadelphia, where they were admired and lauded by contemporary art critics. One wrote in July 1915, "The Pennsylvania School of Landscape Painters is our first truly national expression. It began under the influence of the technique of the French Impressionists. It has restricted itself patriotically to the painting of the typical American landscape." Lathrop was at the center of this New Hope art colony, and in his studio, which was in a cooper shop, he offered lessons to many of the colonists in landscape painting. There were cottages to accommodate the artists, and they ate meals at the inn Lathrop had opened. His wife, Annie Lathrop, hosted Sunday afternoon teas for neighbors, students, and the other artists who had moved to the area. As the Philadelphia Times described it, Lathrop's setup was an ideal place in which the artists may dream their dreams and transfer them to canvas without fear of interruption from the outside world. Oops, I jumped ahead, but I think we're okay. These artists studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts and traveled to Europe, where they admired the works of Monet. But unlike earlier American Impressionists, they did not attempt to copy French Impressionism. Well, maybe we'll go back. They did take up the practice of working outdoors, even in the coldest weather, and their art is characterized by an interest in the quality of color, light, and time of day. Ray Sloan Braden said that when he returned here from Europe and contrasted the beauty of the Delaware Valley, he realized there was nothing like it in France. So the artist settled in and around the New Hope area, purchasing cottages and houseboats. Redfield purchased a small abandoned house on the towpath and quickly started accepting students for summer sketching and landscape painting. Other artists associated with New Hope include Fern Coppedge, again, forgive me if I'm mispronouncing her name, who built a studio and a riverside residence called Boxwood. She became well known for her landscapes, usually snow scenes, and I show you an example, featuring the villages and farms of New Hope and the surrounding Bucks County area. I was very curious to learn that she was the subject of an exhibition at the Michener. 50 of her paintings were shown in 1990, and just recently, in 2020, the museum held another solo exhibition of her work, featuring new acquisitions and celebrating the digitization of her scrapbook. So I'd love to come back and see some of those paintings. Mary Elizabeth Price, whose flower border in the collection of the Michener Art Museum I show here on the left, she studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts with Daniel Garber and took private lessons from William Langson Lathrop. At her New Hope cottage called Pumpkin Seed, she grew a garden that she used as a subject for her paintings. She remained in New Hope for the remainder of her life and gave lectures at the New Hope Women's Club, where she showed her paintings and encouraged local artists. I certainly encourage you to visit the Michener to see certainly this work in person. I was completely transfixed when I stood in front of it. The photograph hardly does justice to her luminescent colors and the sensitive renderings of her garden in full bloom. In 1903, William Lathrop purchased a miller's house, which became a playhouse for the artist's children and their friends. In the late 1920s, the mill began hosting art exhibitions, and other events were held there, such as plays for both adults and children, many of them written in-house. And I included the painting at the right by the contemporary artist, Joe Gierchak. And forgive me if I'm mangling his name as well. He's a contemporary artist who spends time in the New Hope area, and this painting is titled Opening Night. And I show it to remind you that the community house, known as Phillips Mill, continues to function today as a community gathering space for exhibitions, theater, and other activities. Oops. The apex for Pennsylvania Impressionism and painters of the New Hope colony is often considered to be about 1915, when their paintings were featured prominently at the Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco. Redfield had a gallery filled with works there, and Garber and Lathrop both received gold medals. And I show you just one of the many lavishly decorated courtyards of the fair, which celebrated the completion of the Panama Canal and showcased San Francisco's recovery from the 1906 earthquake and fire. Approximately 400 works of art were shown in about 100 galleries, including Quarry Evening by Daniel Garber and Edward Redfield's On the Delaware River. Daniel Chester French's sculpture was prominently featured at the exposition as well, and his Genius of Creation on the right welcomed visitors in the Court of Honor. The exposition, as the confluence of many strands of American art production, offers a nice segue for us from New Hope to Cornish and Stockbridge. Paintings by New Hope artists were exhibited alongside those by Cornish and Stockbridge painters and sculptors, including Saint-Gaudens and French. Although Saint-Gaudens had passed away almost a decade earlier, his seated Abraham Lincoln was exhibited at the exposition, along with French's Spirit of Life, and both of these works can be seen in the Monuments and Myths exhibition. So we move from the Panama Pacific to, we'll talk about French and Saint-Gaudens and their respective art colonies. Just as William Langson Lathrop felt the need to find a rural respite from Philadelphia, both Augustus Saint-Gaudens and Daniel Chester French sought relief from the hectic and distracting life of the city, in their case, New York. And like Lathrop, Saint-Gaudens and French found themselves at the very center of their respective communities, attracting others to share in the natural beauty they treasured. In the 1880s, Saint-Gaudens came to Cornish, New Hampshire, where he eventually purchased a home and established a rural studio. French visited Saint-Gaudens there, and he too decided a country house would be nice. Thinking New Hampshire was too far from New York, he focused his search in the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts. In the late 1890s, French purchased a former working farm in the Glendale hamlet of Stockbridge. He and his friend and colleague, architect Henry Bacon, designed a studio with large north-facing windows, an ample workroom, and an ingenious railroad track, which French would use to push sculpture out of doors to view his full-size models in the light of day. Both French and Saint-Gaudens were successful sculptors who found themselves at the center of their respective colonies. Saint-Gaudens invited friends and colleagues to the area, but he had no idea he was actually founding a colony. He recalled in his reminiscences, "Now there are many families. The circle has extended beyond the range even of my acquaintance. The country still retains its beauty, though its secluded charm is being swept away before the rushing automobile." At the property he called Aspet, after his father's birthplace in the Pyrenees in southern France, Saint-Gaudens renovated a former tavern into a comfortable living space, decorated in the eclectic style of the day, with antique furniture and works of art from Europe and Asia, as well as artwork by friends and colleagues. And from about 1900 on, Saint-Gaudens would live at Aspet full-time due to his failing health. French asked Henry Bacon to design a new home to replace the original small farmhouse. A large hallway with north and south facing doors let in the summer breezes, and upstairs generously proportioned bedrooms for the family, as well as for guests and live-in household help. French filled the house with portraits of family members, painting and sculpture he had purchased or received as gifts from fellow artists, and antique furniture, much of it purchased at auction. French named the property Chesterwood after Chester, New Hampshire, home of his paternal and maternal grandparents. And the French family would spend summers at Chesterwood, moving back to New York City for the winter months. As at New Hope, the natural landscape was an important factor. At Cornish, Saint-Gaudens' studio and home faced the majestic view of Mount Ascutney. Mount Ascutney is at the top. Mary French, Daniel Chester French's wife, commented on this in her Memories of a Sculptor's Wife. This porch, where they ate their meals much of the time, looked toward Ascutney, as do most of the houses in Cornish. Just as in Sicily, they look towards Etna, and in Japan towards Fujiyama. It is a cult. When you go to visit their terraces, to eat upon their porches, you find yourself facing the sacred mountain. As I said earlier, French had visited Cornish in the early 1890s. And while he was there, he rented a farmhouse and worked in Saint-Gaudens' studio. Here, he would have admired the view. And when he later purchased the property in Stockbridge, he oriented his studio, residence, porches, and verandas to his sacred peak, Monument Mountain, which you see at the bottom. At their retreats in Cornish and Stockbridge, the sculptors established sites of creativity that were also places of relaxation, entertainment, and familial domesticity. Much of these activities focused around the dining room table, where friends and family would gather. Studio assistant Francis Grimes recalled that Saint-Gaudens always wanted guests for dinner. The home was cheerful in the evening. He wanted noise and laughter, gaiety and simple fun, and there was always music, conversation, and stories. Dinners at Chesterwood were most likely equally as lively and were often followed up with music, dancing, and games in the studio. Family was important to both artists. Their wives, Augustus Saint-Gaudens, herself an artist, and Mary Adams French, a gifted writer who wrote short stories, novels, and plays in her spare time, were called upon to act as hostesses. Mary French hosted weekly afternoon teas on the studio piazza. And their children, Homer Saint-Gaudens, who you see at the left, and Margaret French, who you see at the right, grew up fully immersed in the community that treasured art, nature, and communal life. They both posed for their fathers as well as for other artists, and Margaret often played with clay in her father's studio. So it is no surprise that Margaret French later emerged as a talented portrait sculptor. And Homer Saint-Gaudens also found his way into the art world. As an adult, he was the director of the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh. And in 1932, the museum purchased this portrait on the left by John Singer Sargent. And you may have noticed it earlier, a replica of this portrait hangs in the dining room at Aspet. You can see that at the far left. At Cornish and Stockbridge, both Saint-Gaudens and French employed assistants to help with a variety of tasks, such as preparing and working with clay, building armatures, and plaster casting. Studios were not quiet places of solitary creation. They were lively places of artistic interactions, conversation, music and singing, and constant chatter. Studio assistants would board in nearby cottages, and often they decided to purchase their own homes in the area once they established independent careers. Along with the activities that went on inside the studio, both Saint-Gaudens and French enjoyed spending time outdoors. At Cornish, the artists and their families enjoyed a range of outdoor activities, such as ice hockey on a pond and even tobogganing in the winter. And this picture at the left shows a toboggan run that Saint-Gaudens had built. So I guess you would go up to the top and slide down and then scuttle along that chute. At Chesterwood, French built a tennis court near the studio and took his friends and family on long nature walks in the woods. The Cornish art colony was more of an established colony than what developed at Stockbridge. At the invitation of Saint-Gaudens, and attracted by the natural beauty, available lodgings, and congenial company, artists rented and purchased homes in the immediate area. Many of the artists were friends and colleagues from art school. They knew each other from New York social circles, clubs, and other organizations. Saint-Gaudens also invited promising students he had taught at the Art Students League in New York to work with him in his studio at Cornish. Thomas Wilmer Dewing had studied in Paris with Saint-Gaudens and was an early settler at Cornish. Along with his wife, the artist Maria Oakey Dewing, he spent summers in Cornish from 1885 to 1905, and the natural beauty, access to artistic ideas and exchange had an influence on both of their paintings. This is just one of my favorites. In 1886, Dewing and his wife rented a cottage from Charles Beeman, the New York City lawyer who had first enticed Saint-Gaudens to Cornish. Mr. Dewing came, wrote Beeman. He saw, he remained, and from that event, the colony developed. It was at Cornish that Dewing was inspired by the landscape to create some of the most striking, atmospheric, and ethereal images of women in lush landscapes in all of American art. So I couldn't resist. I have, this is the days from 1886, and this is spring from 1890. And I especially like this one because it shows you the view of Mount Escutney. Against the backdrop of the mountain, 5 dancing women and a pair of elegantly dressed women are in the foreground. One gathering blooms and the other encased in voluminous folds of fabric as she sits perched upon a rock. So I think that's just a beautiful landscape. And again, this one is called Welcome, Sweet Springtime. Although Cornish seems to have inspired some of Dewing's best work, he left the colony after it became, as he said, too socially minded. He retreated to the White Mountains of New Hampshire and later to Maine, because he needed some actual peace and quiet. Others who gravitated to Cornish included dancers such as Isadora Duncan, actors such as Ethel Barrymore, musicians, painters, poets, and writers who rented and bought farmhouses in Cornish and nearby Plainfield. They kept gardens and socialized with one another, and they traveled from home to home on bicycles. In the summer of 1898, Cornish colony member Isadora Duncan stayed at a boarding house in the small Berkshire town of Monterey, and she danced in the garden at Chesterwood and also gave performances at neighboring estates. So the two are about, I can't remember exactly, but maybe about 100 miles apart. I'd have to look up exactly how far apart the two, Stockbridge and Cornish are. Probably about a 3-hour drive, I think. Beginning in the 1880s, women sculptors had access to formal training at art schools, such as the Art Students League in New York, where both Saint-Gaudens and French later taught. Women were frequently hired as studio assistants, where they gained further training in modeling and casting. Saint-Gaudens took on a number of female sculptors as students and assistants, including Frances Grimes, who is at the right, and Helen Farnsworth Mears at the left. Mears studied with Saint-Gaudens at the Art Students League, and after just 2 weeks in his life class, he hired her as one of his first female students. And Frances Grimes worked with Saint-Gaudens for the longest time of all his assistants, and she even stayed on after he died in 1907 to finish the work she had begun under his direction. One of the most well-known artists who have spent time in Cornish is Philadelphia-born Maxfield Parrish, and I thank Jen with we were talking about Maxfield Parrish, and she mentioned the Philadelphia connection. So I was happy to look that up and to be able to work that in. He attended Haverford College and then studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts with Robert Bono and Thomas Anschutz, the teacher of many of the artists who were at New Hope. Parrish resided in Plainfield for almost 70 years and was a member of the Cornish Art Colony. Mary French, Daniel Chester French's wife, recalled that the parish place was, quote, a little rambling farmhouse on a hillside, and in front of the house was the oval pool, which he had made famous with blue waters and peaked owls, recumbent maidens, and youths. So I think she was probably thinking of this painting by Maxfield Parrish called Daybreak when she was writing that anecdote. This work by Parrish clearly shows Mount Scottney in the distance, the verdant hillsides and a calm pool reflecting the clouds above. His trademark luminescent light, so otherworldly in the previous image, here seems to evoke a humid early summer evening as the last bit of sunshine lights up the sky. In 1916, Parrish received a commission to design a stage set for the Plainfield Town Hall. Parrish painted a woodland scene with a shimmering lake and a view of Mount Scottney. Many layers of blue paint give it a luminescent jewel-like tone. The stage lights can create daylight to dusk to twilight and all the degrees in between. Excuse me, and the set is considered one of the most beautiful stages north of Boston. So this is a still from a Vermont Public Television video that you can watch on YouTube, and we will share the web address in the chat, or Jen will follow up with the information. The Vermont Public Television video is focuses on Cornish, but they go to Plainfield, to the town hall, and film a dance performance on Maxfield Parrish's stage. Also in the video are interviews with descendants of colony members and some beautiful photography. So I encourage you to take a look and to see these dancers in action. Dance was a very popular activity at Cornish. And one summer, the colonists staged a work titled Sanctuary, which was written by poet Percy MacKay. The allegorical dance was staged among bird baths in the natural surroundings, and it highlighted the importance of conservation of nature, most specifically birds, birds were considered symbols of imagination and freedom. So you can see a lot of that imagination and freedom in the costumes and the choreography. A pivotal event for the colony took place on June 22nd, 1905, when the artists staged a large-scale play in honor of the Saint-Gaudens' 20th anniversary of their arrival in Cornish. Entitled A Mask of Hours, The Gods in the Golden Bowl, the outdoor performance was inspired by mythological and allegorical plays of the late Renaissance. 65 members of the colony participated, dressed as various Greek gods and goddesses. The sets were designed by Saint-Gaudens and other residents. A contingent of woodwinds and a harpist from the Boston Symphony Orchestra performed as the scenes were played out on the grounds between two great pine trees. The event represented a union of many talents and strong friendships. And I've always been curious why French was actually not invited to attend, given the friendly relationship he had with Saint-Gaudens and his earlier link with the Cornish colony. I've never been able to figure that out. Music was important to Saint-Gaudens and the other artists, and it featured prominently at Cornish, where afternoon musicals were held in various houses. Among the colonists were numerous musicians, composers, and opera singers. At left is a photo of musicians from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, excuse me, who traveled to Cornish to perform for the colonists. French also hosted music events in the Chesterwood studio. One summer, he organized a recital for his model and musical protege, Rosalie Miller. Here, at the right, a trio performs on the studio piazza, which looks out towards Monument Mountain. Tableaux vivants, or living pictures, where artwork was recreated through the use of costumes and gestures, were popular at both sites, as were plays, musicals, and other performances. Stockbridge, as well as nearby Pittsfield and Great Barrington, offered movies, concerts, and theater featuring actors from New York and Boston. So there was always lots happening. At Chesterwood, French made a home movie of guests dancing around the studio garden fountain. Through this movie, we are offered a glimpse of into the joyful activities at Chesterwood, the community that French created, and the overall pleasure of being surrounded by art and nature. Although on a more intimate scale than the dance performance at Cornish, that French chose to preserve this moment speaks to the importance of this gathering of friends celebrating a festive occasion with a dance around the fountain. And again, this is a still from a video, and we will share the link to the Daniel Chester French home movie that is on YouTube, and you can watch the home movie, which includes this very lively dance around a fountain. While not considered an actual art colony like Cornish or New Hope, the town of Stockbridge came to be an important site for artists through the Stockbridge Art Association. The Stockbridge Casino, designed by Stanford White and dating to the late 1880s, had been established as a meeting place for the wealthy townsfolk. It offered its members tennis, billiards, dances, theatricals, and lectures throughout the summer season, as well as annual exhibitions of the Stockbridge Art Association, which featured works by artists who have at any time worked in the Berkshire Hills and vicinity. These artists were potential exhibitors. Considered the most important social and artistic event of summer life in the Berkshires, these exhibitions were a showplace for artwork, as well as a social gathering place for the artists. Opening day, known as Varnishing Day, would be celebrated with tea on the casino porch, hosted by Daniel Chester French and his family. Events surrounding the exhibitions, such as plays, costume parades, and dancing around a bonfire, were also popular. French served as a committee member for the Art Association, helping to select the works by the many artists who converged in the Berkshires during the summer months. A New York Sun article proclaimed Stockbridge an artist colony of which Mr. French is a member. Excuse me. Linking us back to Pennsylvania, a few New Hope artists exhibited at Stockbridge, including John Follansbee, who had spent time in nearby Washington, Connecticut. Follansbee sent works to the Stockbridge exhibition in the mid-1920s, and I thank one of Chesterwood's guides who pointed out John Follansbee to me and mentioned that he was a New Hope artist. And so it was very exciting to find that he had exhibited in Stockbridge. Also, Walter Elmer Schofield showed 5 paintings from 1923 to 26. It's possible these artists were included due to their involvement with the Grand Central Art Galleries of New York, which was affiliated with the Stockbridge Art Association, but they may have also spent time in the Berkshires, as evidenced by the titles of some of their canvases, such as Follansbee's paintings titled Berkshire Meadows and Berkshire Hills, for which unfortunately images aren't available. And the painting at the right by Schofield, which is titled Berkshire Hills. However, Schofield spent a great deal of time near Berkshire, I think that's how they pronounce it, in England, where there are also picturesque hills. So some additional research is needed to determine what, if any, links he might have had to the Berkshires of Massachusetts. Between 1910 and 1931, approximately 450 artists participated in the Stockbridge exhibitions, and a large proportion of these artists were women, including sculptor Brenda Putnam, whose fountain featuring a young child surprised by a writhing sea creature graced promotional material for the exhibition. Although her main studio was in New York City, Putnam spent time in the Berkshires, and she was actually quite multi-talented. She played piano as part of a trio called the Edith Brubel Trio, and in 1916, the group presented a benefit concert of folk songs of 17 nations at the Stockbridge Casino. Painter Jean McLean and her husband, portraitist John Johansson, were close friends with the French family, and they purchased a Stockbridge summer home they called Weyburn Hill. They would often entertain the members of the Stockbridge Art Association at their home, as Johansson served as president of the committee. At left is Jean McLean's painting titled Morning, used in advertising material for the art exhibition. Given the preponderance of women artists in the Stockbridge exhibitions, it is somewhat heartening to see that the organizers chose to highlight works by women in their promotions. And I think this painting certainly deserved to be highlighted. In this majestic canvas, two young women, one holding a very large infant, are seated in a landscape that resembles the rolling hills of Western Massachusetts. It is a bit of a curious image, to me, simultaneously referring to women's traditional roles of taking care of young children, yet they are not shown in a home or an enclosed garden. They are seated somewhat precariously against a very ominous, dark, shaded mountain behind them. The artist couple, John Johansson and Jean McLean, often visited Chesterwood, and their names appear in the voluminous guest book on many occasions. Johansson painted this intimate portrait of French and his wife, Mary, a quiet moment at home, free from company and the demands of socializing. While both French and his wife often hosted large dinners and gatherings, they preferred the quiet of each other's company. Another set of close friends to the French family was Robert Vanno, who painted at Giverny and adopted the French Impressionist style, and his wife, sculptor Bessie Potter Vanno. The two spent time at the Old Lyme Colony in Connecticut, at Cornish with Saint-Gaudens, and in Stockbridge, where they both routinely exhibited works at the Art Association. French wrote to his brother in 1912, "Speaking of Glendale reminds me that the Vannos are thinking seriously of making a summer home in Stockbridge, and I am trying to interest them in property adjacent to ours. I have succeeded so far as to induce them to promise to come up and look at the property next spring. They are nice people, and I should like to have them here." Unfortunately, the Vannos didn't purchase the property, but the next summer they spent 3 weeks in June with the French family, and Vanno painted portraits of both French and his daughter Margaret. And I show you the portrait of Margaret French at the top right. The Vannos then went on to Cornish for the remainder of the season. On the eve of their departure, French wrote to his brother that the Vannos leave us tomorrow for Cornish, where they are to spend the summer. They expect to paint and model the Wilsons, who, as you know, are to be there. And so I like this juxtaposition of the painting of Margaret French at the top with an image from Cornish country up in New Hampshire at the bottom, and at left are Robert and Bessie Potter Vanno. And here are the Wilsons. Woodrow Wilson and his family were at Cornish in 1913. And there, Vanno painted this portrait at the left of Margaret, Eleanor, and Jessie Wilson with their mother. Set against greenery, columns, and overlooking a small reflecting pool, the Wilson women are enjoying a quiet afternoon tea, probably at Harlekenden, the summer White House of Woodrow Wilson from 1913 until 1915. And Bessie Potter Vanno created this elegant sculpture of tall, slender Jessie Wilson, the most politically active of Wilson's 3 daughters. A masterful artist, Vanno excelled at figures of women, such as dancers in motion, or a young mother enthroned with her children. Her works were featured in Stockbridge Art Association exhibitions in the late 1920s and early 1930s. Other artists active in the Stockbridge area include Rosina Emmett Sherwood, who had studied in Paris and with William Merritt Chase in New York. She kept a studio in the city, where she was a member of the art community at the 10th Street Studios. Known for her illustrations and an allegorical mural for the Women's Building at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, she later concentrated on genre scenes and portraits of her family, painted while she summered in the Berkshires. She exhibited in or participated as a committee member for almost every Stockbridge Art Association exhibition from 1913 to 1931. And she comes from the very talented Emmett family. Her younger sister, Lydia Field Emmett, was also active in the art scenes in New York and Stockbridge, where she built her own spacious summer house called Strawberry Hill. Like her sister Rosina, Emmett also contributed a mural to the Women's Building at the Chicago World's Fair, and she became well known for her portraits in oil and pastel. And her works at the Stockbridge Art Exhibition often garnered great praise, as well as prizes such as the Popular Prize in 1929. It must have been a great achievement considering how many paintings were exhibited there. And their first cousin, Ellen Emmett Rand, was also noted for her portraits, including the portrait of Augustus Saint-Gaudens at left that is included in Monuments and Myths. And at the right is John Johansson's portrait of French, which is also in the exhibition. Rand's primary studio was in New York, but she would work in Salisbury, Connecticut, where her family lived. Rand had visited Giverny in the late 1890s and attended William Merritt Chase's Shinnecock Hills Summer School on Long Island. All three Emmets routinely exhibited works at the Stockbridge Art Association and served on the committee along with Daniel Chester French. So I hope you're recognizing that some of these art colonies continue to pop up, that Ellen Emmett Rand had visited Giverny and the Shinnecock Summer School. So there's a lot of interest in moving around between the colonies. Sculptor Evelyn Beatrice Longman studied and worked with French and stayed at Chesterwood in the early 1900s. Although she went on to establish her own studios in New York and Connecticut, she continued to exhibit at the Stockbridge Art Association. And Victory at left was shown in 1925, and it too is included in Monuments and Myths. And at the right is a photograph of Evelyn Beatrice Longman and Daniel Chester French looking at one of his models on the railroad track just outside his studio at Chesterwood. While at Chesterwood, Longman made this portrait at the left of French's daughter, Margaret, who as a young adult was at the center of the Stockbridge social scene. This portrait of Margaret as a Bacchante was shown in the 1916 Stockbridge exhibition. Margaret French would later become a celebrated sculptor, and her Girl with the Curls, which debuted at the Stockbridge Art Association to great acclaim, was one of her most successful works and is included in the Monuments and Myths exhibition. And at the center is a portrait of the young Margaret French socializing with some friends at Chesterwood during the summertime. Art colonies are still very much alive today as artists continue to come together to live, work, socialize, and trade ideas. Many sites of historic artist colonies have become museums. Both Chesterwood and the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park are open to the public, and cultural activities continue to bring artists and audiences together, where art and the natural landscape provide inspiration. Here at left, a musical trio performs in the Chesterwood Studio Garden this past summer, and at the right, drummers light up the landscape at Cornish. I wish I had a video of that. I'm sure that was amazing. The local dance group Berkshire Pulse incorporates features of the built and natural landscape into their dances, as well as stories of the French family. Two dancers dancing in the Chesterwood Studio Garden along the Woodland Walk are shown at the left. And at right, at Cornish, guests take over the lawn in a jubilant community dance. And if you could see behind them, you would see Mount Ascutney. It's sort of behind the dancers. At both Chesterwood and Cornish, colonists and guests would stage elaborate tableaux vivants, literally living pictures based on famous paintings and sculpture. At Chesterwood, this tradition continues using the oversized wooden frame French had made. And so I imagine that many of our viewers know what the tableau vivant actor is portraying at the left. And at the right, another young participant is made up to look like Manet's bar at the Folies Bergère. At Chesterwood, an annual Artist in Residence program hosts artists working in a variety of media, including ceramicists, landscape architects, and sculptors, such as Ed Fraughton, seen in this photo outside the Morris studio on the Chesterwood campus, presenting a public program last summer. While he was at work in the Morris Center, we actually had this past summer 3 artists in residence. They were working in studios in the Chesterwood historic residents. They were not sleeping over, but they were working there during the day. So it was nice to have that community, even if it was just 3 artists at the same time. And here at Cornish, the artist Sean Hunter Williams is seen working on a clay model in the artist in residence studio. Excuse me. On view at the Michener is an exhibition of the works of George Anthonison. The exhibition celebrates the art of the Bucks County artist's career spanning 65 years as a figurative sculptor and his presence in the regional arts community. Anthonison was a sculptor in residence at the Saint-Gaudens National Historical Park in 1971, and in 2015, 3 Anthonison bronzes were exhibited as part of the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Cornish historic site. And the arts continue at the Phillips Mill at New Hope through continued exhibitions, painting demonstrations, concerts, dance performances, and even children's theater. Each year, a gala supports the Preservation Fund, and everything is organized and directed by volunteers from the Mill's membership. Along with the Bucks County Playhouse, the Phillips Mill Art Center is an integral part of the vibrant visual and performing arts scene of New Hope. Another organization, the New Hope Colony Foundation for the Arts, was founded in 2018 to preserve the artistic community of the New Hope Colony and create places for artists to work, study, and collaborate. This is still a work in progress, and the foundation is currently working on establishing an endowment. They hope to acquire and restore historic structures and provide artists with accommodations, work studios, as well as an exhibition space. Today, at artist residencies all over the world, artists continue to live and work alongside each other in sites of community and creativity. We have come far from the world of the original art colonies, idyllic countryside havens that involved long train rides to reach and were self-consciously separated from urban life and metropolitan society. But artists continue to feel the need to come together, to work and play, and to foster creativity and community amongst themselves. New Hope, Cornish, and Chesterwood are 3 very different examples of historic artist colonies. They have many qualities in common. They each provided artists with respite from the hustle and bustle of cities, yet connections with urban patrons, fellow artists, and exhibition venues were not severed. Artists may have originally sought picturesque landscapes and the quiet of nature, but these colonies would become busy hives of activity and offered not only a sense of community, but inspiration and cross-pollination with other art forms, such as music, dance, and theater. While all these places have a rich historical past, they continue to vibrate with life, art, and cultural activities in the present. I hope you'll visit the Michener Museum to see Monuments and Myths before it closes in January. You enter the exhibition, as I mentioned earlier, through the Pennsylvania Impressionism Gallery, which is filled with works by the artists of the New Hope Colony. As you depart Monuments and Myths, be sure to see the sculpture of George Anthonison. His connection to the Cornish colony provides a fitting coda to Monuments and Myths and connects the making of sculpture at the colonies at Stockbridge and Cornish to the current day. The Irish painter Henry Jones Thaddeus, reflecting on his days at a French art colony, wrote, "The life in the open air, together with the absorbing occupation of painting from nature, followed by the pleasant reunions in the evenings, constituted an ideal existence to which I know no parallel." There would have been no parallel to the ideal existence in the artistic worlds of New Hope, Cornish, and Stockbridge. I hope you might agree. Thank you so much for joining me this evening to discover these 3 special places.
Thank you so much, Dana. You can probably hear in the background I'm being serenaded by my very talented nephew.
Oh, fantastic.
So it's been lovely viewing the art and listening to the music. We don't have any questions, so I think we're going to say good night for tonight, everyone. If you do think of something, you have my email and you can send it along to me and I'll make sure Dana gets it. So thank you so much, Dana. That was fascinating. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Okay.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.